to On Track GP. We are kicking off our very first preview of the F1 season. I'm very excited for our brand new show. And joining me is Matisse. How are you doing? I see way too much of you.
Yeah, literally, we now do football and F1.
We do everything
I'm buzzing
together.
for this. I feel like this is my escapism. Can't wait for the season to start. Yeah, really excited.
Maybe
Buzzing.
not get some glory this season.
Yeah, let me walk on before I can run on. That
Also joining us is Sam from Planet F1. So good to have you and all your expertise.
Thank you, yeah, it's good to be here. Glad to get the season going. Been a long winter.
Yeah, definitely needs to get warmed up in the summer. And joining us is also Joe, Ferrari fan with the hat.
Yeah, is it that obvious?
Yeah, it's a bit of a giveaway. A little bit of a giveaway. So we're all very, very excited for Bahrain this weekend, but I feel like we should just touch on, what happened last season. Sam, I think we'll start with you.
Okay.
Last season, there was so much that was going on between, porpoising. I've never said the word porpoising so many times as I had done last season. The issues that Mercedes obviously had, strategic issues with Ferrari, Verstappen and Red Bull just being so dominant. What did you make of last season overall?
Yeah, I think it was quite a different season to 2021, obviously, because we had a lot of excitement. And this was, not to say a damp squib, but it obviously died down about halfway through the year. I think there was a lot of excitement going into the year with all these regulation changes, and then it quickly emerged that Red Bull's car was the strongest over the course of the season. I think early on Ferrari were right up there, but as you touched upon, there was strategy errors, driver errors, just pretty much every error you could have, really. Like they experienced at some point during the season, and it became a one-man show, really. Max Verstappen showed that his first world title wasn't a fluke. I mean, that last one, 15 wins in a single season is a record. So, yeah, it was obviously a very strong one for Red Bull, but it wasn't without drama. Of course, we had all the cost cap stuff late in the season, so it's never dull at Red Bull. But yeah, I think the overriding story was just Verstappen does it again, really.
Yeah. Joe, from your perspective as a Ferrari fan, Sam touched on it, so did I. The strategic issues seem to be what really cost Ferrari last season.
Yeah.
That they looked to have had a good car, they got off to a good start, but as it went on, it just kind of tailed off, didn't it?
Yeah, well, you sort of broke my heart when you said we were going to touch on last season and flooding back. It was awful being a Ferrari fan last season. Maybe not quite as bad as being a Merc fan, but it was just so much promise and so much disappointment relentlessly for 9 months. So yeah, it was not very easy. Yeah.
Yeah, and Matisse, you are a Mercedes fan.
Yeah. We're spoiled. Well, we have been spoiled.
You've been very, very
brought
spoiled.
back to earth last season, for sure. Yeah.
And I think that what showed the most is obviously the car was the fundamental issue. We'd seen Red Bull kind of put a lot of resource into 2021 with the car, same into 2022. And Mercedes, they had a completely new look, and it just didn't really add up to anything, did it?
Yeah, from the moment you see the car bouncing around, like this is Pimp My Ride, this is going to be a long season. I felt sorry for the drivers. We talk about health and safety with the halos coming and all these things, and then the car is literally just moving like this, jittering across the track. And F1 is such a difficult sport as it is for a driver. The concentration, compact, and then you have this shaking constantly. I don't even know how they kept the car straight half the time. It was incredible. But what was really interesting as a Merc fan is to see George's consistency. His first season, obviously was so unlucky not to win in his debut race when he was coming in for Hamilton in the first place the season before. And then for him to go and have consistency throughout in a difficult year for Mercedes, I thought it was good signs from him. So I just want him to kind of carry that on. We know Hamilton's quality, in terms of he's established himself. I was just hoping that he'd just be able to get that record for World Championships. Maybe it will happen, maybe it won't. But for George, I'm really excited as well. Really excited for George.
And of course, George Russell was the only one to actually win a race for Mercedes last year at Brazil. So there's a lot of eyes on George Russell. I'm always looking at him as well as if, is he going to then be number one at some point? Because the Lewis era will eventually come to an end, and they're going to want to keep Russell for a very long time. Yeah. I want to kind of just talk about and touch on the midfield battle that we had last season, because we saw it kind of Alpine, McLaren. There was a lot of goings on actually, aside from racing, more also with silly season. Piastri did them so dirty at Alpine. And also Alonso. So there's a lot of changes. Have you seen anything that you think that is going to be the same again this season?
No, to be honest, I think a lot of what we've seen from testing, it looked like this McLaren does look quite off the pace. I mean, obviously it's testing, so you take everything with a grain of salt, really. But in comparison, the form of the two teams look massively different to what they were last year. I mean, the P4 race was very, very tight last year. It came down to a few points really, and this year it looks like it's going to be completely different. Like as you said, I think I'm one of the few people who sort of agree with what Piastri did. I think he was within his rights to sort of move to a team where he was guaranteed a race seat. But there's a lot of unknowns with McLaren. They've got a new team principal who's moved up through the system really, and they've got this new driver. It's no matter how highly rated he is because he won F3 and then he won F2, there's still a lot of unknown going into a car that doesn't look great. And we saw even experience like Daniel Ricciardo, he's really struggled the last 2 seasons.
Yeah.
So if he's struggling, then who knows how Piastri's going to feel. But then I think the story for Alpine is a completely different one. They're very much on the up. Like they obviously had this thing last season where they sort of became the butt of the joke, really, that famous Piastri tweet. And then, but since then they've been really smart. They've got Pierre Gasly in, who's a driver that I personally rate really highly. I think it was time he moved away from the Red Bull family. And I think, their car looks strong. Their testing performance wasn't great, but again, I think that was just sandbagging, as they call it. I'm sort of backing them. I went to their launch and they were very optimistic about their chances. They didn't think they were going to break into that top 3, which is understandable, but they said they wanted to really be the P4 team, like solidify that bit and then sort of look upwards and downwards. And I think they've got all the tools to do that really this season.
Yeah, going to be really interesting in that midfield battle. Let's actually talk about then what's happening this season. We're going to come back to testing a little bit later on, but what's new and what's kind of changed. There hasn't been too many changes, have there, in terms of what they are and are not allowed to do? That was more last season. Yeah,
I think 2022 saw this massive change in regulations, and this sort of just been an evolution of that really. It wasn't going to be totally right up everything again. I think one of the main points is the FIA have dictated that the floors have got to be raised ever so slightly. I think it's 30 millimeters off the top of my head. So that's obviously, it sounds tiny, but that's quite a lot for an F1 car. And that was purely to do with porpoising. I think we obviously had this drama, especially at the start of the last season, where people like Toto Wolff arguing, as you mentioned, that it's not fair on the health and safety of these drivers. And it wasn't just Mercedes that was suffering for it. I remember Pierre Gasly saying he thought it'd have long-term effects on his health. And so that's the main change that's happened this season, is they've just slightly raised the floor. So hopefully, as we saw in testing, porpoising isn't really a thing. But in terms of the car themselves, they're very similar. We're sort of in this phase with a purgatory really, I guess, where we've got all these changes coming in 2026. We had all these changes last year, and this sort of period is just, okay, everything's as it was. Let's just wait till 2026 when all these engine changes come in. In terms of the sport itself, there's quite a few changes, and for a start, we've got 3 US races, which is only the second time in history that a country's has had 3 races in a single season. So that's a very big change, and obviously it's a huge calendar. It was supposed to be 24, but obviously the China Grand Prix got cancelled, but it's still 23. That's still a record, and that's a lot of races for not only the drivers but the teams to deal with. So that's going to be another added element that's going to be exciting to watch.
Miami was crazy.
Yeah, Miami was crazy.
Really crazy. And then now you're adding Vegas on top.
Man.
It's just, we ain't gonna be able to have the capacity to go to Vegas. Those ticket prices are just, I'm flabbergasted, honestly. It's crazy.
And this is, we've had the circuit looks unbelievable in Vegas as well. It's not just,
not look
I mean,
great.
who wouldn't want to be driving up and down the strip?
Unbelievable.
It is completely unbelievable.
It should be great.
But you mentioned that there's the American races. There's also American drivers. Logan Sargent, he's coming in. He's joining Williams. Another American. He's a rookie. Do we know much about what we're looking for?
I think we've got 3 rookies coming in this year. So we've got him, we've got Piastri, then we've got Nick de Vries at AlphaTauri. But I think Logan Sargent's the more unknown of them, as you say. I touched on Piastri's won F3, won F2, whereas Sargent's sort of been around P4. He wasn't at the top end of it really, and I think that's sort of a reflection of where Williams are. Obviously, other than 2020, I think when Haas finished last, that Williams have been consistently at the bottom of the standing. So the calibre of driver they're going to be able to get is going to be a lot harder than some of the teams at the top of the grid. There's not a lot known about Logan Sargent going into this sport, and I think this season, and I think even American audiences are quite unfamiliar with him because he moved to Europe when he was very young. He started competing in F4 and all those kind of series, but he's sort of this fresh face. I mean, I think the good thing for him is there's not a lot of expectation on him. Like the Williams team, they're sort of expected to be near the bottom. Like no one's expecting podiums or wins, so he's sort of got a year to bed in. And I think even if he ends this year with no points, I can't imagine Williams are going to get rid of him. Like I think they've really put their money on him being good in the next few seasons, and maybe not so much this year. And whereas sort of the expectation of Piastri and de Vries as well is going to be a lot higher just through the teams they're at, really.
Do you reckon they get rid of Albon if he scores no points this season?
If the Albon scores, I think that's a very bad season for Albon. I think we saw last year that he was very good, like his comparison to Latifi, which obviously Latifi's got his haters, as it were. Yeah, but Albon did. Yeah,
the memory will live on.
Albon did really well to get points out of a car that wasn't performing well, and I think he's if he finishes with 0 points, I'm more inclined to believe it's the car's fault. I think he's a very good driver,
Really?
but I could be completely wrong, and he has in there and. Sargent scores points and points, but we'll see as it
that would be the nail in the coffin if Sargent outscores Albon.
Yeah, by a long way,
like, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Williams. I think he's got a multi-year deal. I think Williams stick with him. Like he's shown enough. But yeah, if Sargent massively outscores him, that would be a huge surprise, really. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fall of Williams is quite staggering when you look at the days of Massa and you look at Bottas and Mercedes-powered engine and just being right behind them, podiums, constantly competing, so quick. I remember Interlagos and some of the races they had there, but literally now you're saying there's just no expectation. There's nothing to hang your hat on, no points, nothing. So I guess how do they kind of come back from that then? Because when you're at the bottom, you really, every time you raise through the grid, it's money, isn't it?
Does the cost cap not benefit teams like Williams?
It does, but I think there was a good example of the teams at the top of the grid have had so long. Like, I mean, if you imagine they're doing a race, like, so the cost cap is here, and the other teams have already had such a head start. It's going to take a while for that gap to really close down.
Yeah,
and like
seasons.
I think we saw with Haas last year, they weren't actually meeting the cost cap. So it's still quite a high figure. I think it's $140 million per season, which is quite a lot of money. Like, and F1 is definitely a sport whereas if you're not spending loads of money, you're eventually going to get overtaken. But it is sort of a changing time for Williams. They've got James Vowles, who's come in from Mercedes. So he's a man who's obviously got a massive experience with a team that's won all these championships. So presumably he knows a bit what he's doing. It's his first team principal role, so it's going to be interesting to see how he sort of copes with that, really. But I think it's the perfect place for him to learn, really. Like as I said, there's not huge expectations for Williams. In fact, I think they might finish P9 this season. But that's a very that seems like a lofty.
Ahead of who?
I think AlphaTauri aren't going to be great. So I think I've sort of
worse than Williams.
Yeah, like, and even saying that, like, that's a shocking thing to say. They're going to be P9, but like, I think there's going to be a little bit of improvement. I think they've got two. Wow. I think Albon's a great driver, and I think James Vowles must know what he's doing, really.
A few more changes at Ferrari. Mattia Binotto is out. Frederic Vasseur is in. We mentioned the strategy. We don't want to keep going over it. It's painful for you.
Yeah.
But and it doesn't solely lie on the team principal, but I guess he is the one.
Yeah, it comes from the top.
It falls on.
Right, it's got to come from the top. They've changed their strategist as well as Mattia Binotto, so I'm quite optimistic about it. It was on that sort of the precipice of pushing Max and Red Bull to the end last season. If they get a few things right, the car's still going to be competitive. Again, as you said, you take everything from testing with a pinch of salt, but they're good, got a good amount of laps, good times. I really think that if I'm completely honest, I don't think Charles or Sainz are quite there to win the Drivers' Championship, but I think they can push for the constructor. I really do.
Interesting. I mean, look, you have created a car that can challenge first and foremost, and last season it was your best opportunity just to rub it in a bit more to win a championship in over a decade. But who knows?
Do you like Red Bull?
I do like Red Bull. But I actually, do you know what? I do like Ferrari as well. I'm a Red Bull fan, but I really like Ferrari.
You're not wearing that Ferrari jacket when it comes. That comment.
Just rubbing salt in the wounds. Ferrari fans are not going to like me. I apologise. Shall we talk about testing and this week and kind of what happened? Again, Verstappen looking very comfortable, wasn't he, Sam?
Yeah, I think that's just the overriding feeling coming out of testing is Red Bull are very strong. Again, like they had no real problems. I think Max Verstappen was very quiet, which is obviously a very good thing because he's not complaining about anything. So I think they could have got all they wanted out, really. Like reliability and they had the speed, and that's sort of what you want from testing. But they weren't the only ones that had a good testing. I think Aston Martin was sort of a lot of people's surprise package. They really performed well. Like there's been a huge project going into Aston Martin. Like Lawrence Stroll is, to be fair, he's put his money where his mouth is. He's said he wants to fight for championships and he's put the money behind it. So they're based at Silverstone, but they're making a lot of upgrades to their base. Like I think that's going to be, so parts of that's going to be completed this year. They've got Alonso in, who's a very demanding driver. So I think obviously Vettel's won more world championship. But I think Alonso sort of, elevates the team more because he's not going to settle for anything than what he was promised. And he presumably, if he left Alpine, he had a pretty good promise of what was coming. But yeah, and they were one of the stronger teams out of testing. They have got Dan Fallows, who was the ex-Red Bull head of Aero, so this is his first real car that he's had an influence of. So yeah, there were a lot of teams that did well in testing, but I think Red Bull and Aston Martin were sort of the takeaways from everyone that said,
obviously we can't read too much into one testing of Bahrain because there's so many different types of tracks. But with Aston Martin, I find the dynamic with Lance Stroll quite interesting. Is he going to be able to keep up with the standard that they're trying to get to, which is getting back to the top?
No.
And when that time comes, what is going to happen to Lance?
Short answer, no. Surely not.
It's his son. Lawrence Stroll literally bought a team so his son could race.
But
so
if his son is not up to the level,
Yeah.
say Aston Martin, I think they're looking, according to testing, maybe they're going to fight for that 4th spot, which is what Alpine and McLaren were going for the last season. If they start to really push now, and he's maybe costing them points, and what do you do with your son at that point?
Yeah, this is almost a question of like, how much is your son worth, basically, right? You know, how much money can you throw at it and not get the results? Look, I think he's actually I think Lance Stroll is maybe a little bit better, to be fair, than everybody gives him a little bit credit for. He obviously he is capable of driving. He wouldn't be in a seat if he had no ability whatsoever. But you're right. As you're saying, Sam, they want to fight for championships, and I do not think Lance Stroll is a championship driver. He's a good midfield driver, can do a job in a team that's going to finish 6th, 5th, maybe even 4th. But if you put him and someone like Max Verstappen in the same car, forget it. Forget it.
Yeah, there's a lot of father-son relationships that are Zach Brown, Lando, Horner, Max.
Yeah, this is real
father-son.
It's real son. I do think though for Aston Martin having someone like Alonso is amazing, and I think he's 41 years old now.
Yeah, he is.
He might be 42. I think.
Yeah, I mean he's old. So I think it's a good thing though, bringing the experience, and I don't think there's going to be that competitiveness that you'll see between him and Stroll, because he knows he's the son of the boss. So realistically, it's not going to be that battle. I think that maybe this stage in his career, he knows he's moved to a car that is competitive. He can potentially get on a podium. He can potentially get in the points, but also more so that he doesn't need to necessarily be challenging the other driver. He's happy to do this as like a team thing and get Aston somewhere near the top.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting moment last year at the US race, obviously when the two crashed together, and I think if it was any other driver, Alonso would have been furious because he was entirely in the right. He was going for the overtake and Stroll sort of cut him off, and Stroll ended up out and Alonso somehow finished, but he was very calm afterwards. I think he sort of accepted his role. Like, it's a weird moment for him in his career because he's sort of been given this chance to drive a very quick car, but it comes with this cost that he's traditionally not been one who's been overly accommodating for his teammates. He's sort of always seen himself as the main driver, as we saw with Hamilton during the McLaren days. Those two are at each other every week, but he's sort of in this position now where like he accepts that Stroll is obviously owner's son, so there's going to be limitations to what he can and can't say, but at the same time, like, Alonso wouldn't have gone there if he's being made to play second fiddle to Aston Martin. I think as much as we say that Stroll's obviously a pay driver and his dad paid for the team, I think Lawrence Stroll's a very smart man. He wouldn't have got in as Alonso if he wasn't promising that you're going to do well in the season. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting dynamic that's going to happen.
There was a race where Alonso was kind of gliding.
Yeah, that was the US race. Yeah, they hit each other.
And he still managed to finish. Driver of the day that day. No doubt.
I think it's another point. We say he's 41, but he hasn't shown any signs of being a terrible driver. Like Alpine last year. He's a very good driver still. So
I want to talk about McLaren in testing because they weren't looking so strong. They've actually been quite open with the fact that the car isn't really up to standard where they want it to be. They think that they're going to get an upgrade before Azerbaijan. But where does that kind of leave McLaren? Yeah,
it's been a difficult few years for McLaren, really. I think during that COVID season, they were sort of one of the stronger teams, really. Norris was getting podiums, Ricciardo famously got that win. But since then, it's been a real struggle, really. They've sort of fallen further and further back, and I think the performance in testing suggests there's not going to be a lot there to be optimistic about, certainly in the early stages. I think I touched on it previously, but it's just a massive period of change. They've got a new team principal, they've got Piastri in, who's a very highly rated driver, but perhaps not one that's been proven in F1. And in my mind at least, currently I don't think they're challenging for that P4 spot. I think Alpine look a step ahead, really, and I think even Aston Martin looks sort of above them where they are. And Yeah, I just think it's going to be a very difficult season for them. But that's certainly how it looked after testing.
Yeah, pushing them further down the pack. Should we talk about Haas quickly? I mean, everyone's favourite. I mean, they just make me smile.
Love Haas.
I love Haas.
Love Haas.
Gunther Steiner, I mean, just what a guy. What a guy. And they seem to be okay during testing. I mean, they're looking potentially mid-table-ish. They were happier with the car last season, weren't they?
Yeah, and then they've got two drivers that have a lot of laps behind them, a lot of tracks driven. Yeah, exactly. Look, they're never gonna challenge at the top. Not this season. But I think if they could get 7th or 6th, that'd be a phenomenal season for Haas. And I think 7th really is achievable if they can. It'll be consistency. It'll be the consistency of the drivers and the consistency of the car. That'll be the thing for them.
I think so. What are your views on Magnussen and Hülkenberg?
I think Magnussen really stepped up last year. He really stepped up. I remember when he first came into the sport, he was very rash. He was very you couldn't really read him. He was a very chaotic driver.
Yeah.
And I think he's kind of matured last year. Last year he was very stable to the point where he was putting up some serious finishes. Like you said, he literally was on pole as well. So for me with Magnussen, I think it's all about just continuing that. Obviously, he was returning to the team as well, which was always a little bit of drama whenever you're returning. I remember the whole Daniel Ricciardo, will he go back to Alpine situation, which never materialised. And then Hülkenberg is just so much experience as well. He's been around the block for ages. So I think Haas actually have a good lineup. I agree with you. Gone are the days of the Mazepins and the drama and that's very loosely why I do like the fact that they bring Drive to Survive in just for the midfield battle. You feel like you get to know the lesser teams more. There's always the kind of attention on the top teams. Everybody's always going to follow them in the front of the grid. That's where the camera pans. But when you're getting to know the back of the grid and the directors, etc., I think that's what draws more people in, because I'm genuinely interested to see how Haas do this season.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Mazepin and Mick to Hülkenberg and Magnussen is a massive upgrade.
I mean, I think everyone wanted it to kind of work with Schumacher. I mean, I did, but after like the third, fourth time, he'd like split the car in half. You were just like, Mitch, this is not.
He didn't seem to have that confidence within himself. It just felt like as if he needed that kind of encouragement and that kind of arm around the shoulder, and he never really got it.
And maybe now as a reserve driver, that's where he could get that. He could build that confidence, being around top teams, being around top drivers, and who knows? I mean, I'd love to see him back in the sport driving at some point. But he's not there yet.
Yeah, I think so. All right, we're going to talk a bit more about the midfield later on, but I want to talk about my favourite subject, which is, of course, Red Bull, and looking at where they're at, because we saw in testing, they did really, really well. Perez, fastest lap of the day on day 3. People suggesting that Red Bull, they've got a 0.3 to 0.5 second advantage coming into the race. I know it's testing. As you said, we just take it with a pinch of salt, but they look very comfortable. They look like they're not really going to get knocked off the top.
Yeah, I don't think there's an obvious Achilles heel for them. Certainly, it sounds boring to say, but they just look the favourite. Like, they performed really well last year, and I think even with this cost cap element, I think that penalty is something they're going to experience more next year rather than this year. And I think nailing those 22 regulations was just so important, because I think once you had such a good base, and we saw the opposite of Mercedes, them having not a great car to build on, Red Bull had this great car off the bat and they could just spend the year improving on it. And then it was massively in their favour that they won the championship quite early on, so they could essentially just focus on next year, and that's only going to serve them well as the season goes on. I think we'll wait and see how much of an advantage they have, if they do have one in Bahrain this weekend, but they just starting from a very strong point, and they were traditionally a very good team that develops well. I mean, you saw last year their car wasn't the best on the grid, but they developed really strongly and they just became better and better and better. And if they do that, if they start from a very high base and they do that, and they're just going to fly away with it, really,
It feels like they will just run away with it.
Yeah.
It feels like Red Bull are kind of inevitable now. They've got this momentum just going constantly. They locked up Perez onto this year. They kind of settled all the doubts, and I think he's such a good second driver for Verstappen. I think the balance is, I know they had their issues last season and there was the whole thing of not letting him overtake and whatnot, but Perez, I just feel like he's never going to be the driver that holds a grudge. I feel like he's just he's so happy to be
he's a proper team player.
He's a proper team player. Like, I haven't really, probably maybe since Bottas at Mercedes, maybe you'd say, like a real team player. You don't really find that very often, and he just churns out consistency, and in the wet you can rely on him. I think he's great, Perez. I love him. I do.
I honestly think he might struggle a bit, Checo, this season.
Really?
I think he's got the added pressure of Daniel Ricciardo coming in, right? And Daniel Ricciardo, as the reserve driver at Red Bull, has so many fans. People want to see him in the seat. They're going to massively prioritise Max. Of course, they're going to prioritise Max to win the drivers. And I think Max probably will win the drivers. But I think Checo will be left behind. I think the pressure of the day-to-day stresses of people wanting to see Daniel Ricciardo in a seat and have a race, I think that could weigh heavy on him, and I think we could see some errors from him.
I'm such a big fan of Checo. I love Daniel Ricciardo, but I actually prefer Checo, and I think that he's such a great driver as well and team player. Why would you want to come in? Because for me, the dynamic that Verstappen and Checo have is perfect. You know, everyone knows their roles. Yes, would it have been nice for Verstappen to let him through last season? Yes, it would have been quite nice to repay the favour, because I think a lot of the reason why Verstappen has been so successful is actually because of Checo as well. But I think that if you put Daniel Ricciardo in, I still think he's a bit hot-headed. I think he wants to have that battle, and I don't think that will work very well with Red Bull.
I just feel like in terms of driver quality now, it feels like Ricciardo's regressed so much. I just can't see him stepping into a Red Bull after struggling in the McLaren, where Lando was just sweeping the floor of him. I can't see how Ricciardo goes into that Red Bull and performs to a high enough standard to get Red Bull that Constructors Championship. I just see him coming in there and it's not going to work for me.
Yeah, but I think just because he's so popular. He's so popular, fans of the sport want to see Daniel Ricciardo driving, and I think it'll be that pressure, social media, people will be talking about Daniel Ricciardo. Even if he's not driving, he'll be talked about, he'll be seen around, and I really genuinely think that could get in Checo's head, and that could be a barrier for him.
Interesting, we'll have to see. Let's look at Ferrari. Are we expecting them to do better this season, Sam?
Yes. Sorry, I yes.
I spoke without moving my lips. Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the problems weren't car focused last year, and I think it makes me see how much Fred Vasseurs changed that really, because obviously he's massively experienced in the sport, but it's at Sauber, it's not a team that's fighting for the top of the championships really. Yeah, I think they've got two strong drivers. I've always I know we had a bit of a discussion before we went on air, but I've always thought Leclerc was sort of a level above Sainz, and I think Sainz, sort of not in a similar mold to Perez, but that's sort of that second driver who's still a very good quality, but it's perhaps not going to push for world championships. I mean, if you remember, he's only got one race win in his career so far, and fair enough, he was at McLaren, he wasn't at teams that were expected to fight for the championship. But yeah, I think they've got everything lined up to do well. I think that just the problem is Ferrari's Ferrari. They're just such a unique team on the grid. That's to make it even worse for you, but they're such a unique team on the grid that there's no pressure like being in Ferrari. I think we sort of take for granted that just how big they are. They've been in the sport since it began, and they've got pretty much the whole of Italy looking at them. And I think when people think of F1, traditionally they think of Ferrari, and that's just that added pressure. So any decision you make, it's just analysed to death really. You'll do a decision on a Sunday and all the Italian papers the next day will be either slaughtering you for or praising you. So I think there's just always that unknown element of Ferrari that it could explode at any point really, so we'll see when that happens.
They've got a new head of strategy, Ravin Jain, who's taking that position. So let's see if the strategy was the issue last year. Do you think, Joe, that you can challenge? Do you think you can challenge for the drivers?
Short answer, no, I don't think so. I think Max is too dominant. It breaks my heart to say it, but I've got to be honest, I think there's no stopping him and no stopping that car, basically. But I genuinely do think Ferrari, I'm putting it out there, I think Ferrari are going to win the Constructors. Okay. I think, as I said, I think Checo will struggle, so they'll lose a lot of Constructors points from him. Yeah. And I think Sainz and Leclerc, both fantastic drivers, very consistent and also very, very quick. I think they can win the Constructors. I think they can do
just reliability as well, because we saw anytime they actually looked like the strategy was going in the right direction, bang, the engine would blow or something like that.
It literally explodes.
Yeah. So they tell you to box and then stay out while you're in.
Oh,
the old Monaco double stack.
Horrific.
Good double stack.
Horrific. But the SF23, the car does look strong. The team look confident in it. The only concern I seem to have kind of found from Ferrari in testing was the tyre degradation. And that was an issue for them last season as well, especially with the heavy fuel. And back in the last season, I think that did cost them a little bit. Are they going to have rectified that at all? Because it didn't look it.
Yeah, I think we've got to bear in mind that Bahrain's obviously a very hot country, so these tyres do sort of get ripped up a little bit more than we're expecting in other courses, such as Silverstone, obviously where it's much colder. Testing's obviously done in this controlled environment. That's why I sort of take it with a pinch of salt, that this one set of conditions might not always be the same throughout the season. I think one of Ferrari's main problems, as well as the tyres, was actually their turbo last year. They had a lot of issues with that, so it's whether they've managed to fix that, because they had a few races where they couldn't run it at full tilt, as it were, because they were worried it was going to explode, really. So, I think tyres is, if you're concerned about tyres degrading, you must have done something right, because that's quite a minimal thing to really be that bothered
really
by.
Point, yeah.
Okay, right. Should we move on to Mercedes?
I guess so. I mean, with Mercedes, it doesn't seem like they're off to the strongest start in practice in terms of they're going to be a little bit behind. George has already come out and said that, it's going to take some time to really catch up to the leaders. He's always going to speak with ambition. I think he's dreamed of kind of going from that Williams car up to Mercedes. So he's always going to speak in a glowing light. Whereas Hamilton, if you speak to him, it might get a little bit more tense because he's used to being at the top. He's used to winning. He knows that he's one world championship away from being a record breaker. So there's not the same maybe optimism. He's going to be maybe a lot more of a realist. Where do you kind of see, Mercedes this season? Can they compete for that Constructors as well? Or is it going to be a very much similar season to last, where it's just kind of like hanging around that third spot?
Yeah, I think third. I think it's going to be third. They have better season, probably more race wins, you'd imagine as well. I think Lewis and George should each get at least one, if not a couple more, and generally more podiums. But I think they were so far behind last season, and you saw particularly at the beginning of the season. I mean, it was just a complete mess. And there's still going to be, I think, a bit of a hangover from last season. I don't think they'll be up there. Absolutely third. You can't see them dropping down any worse than last year. But I don't think, with the progress that Red Bull and Ferrari have made, I don't think they'll be there to challenge really for second or first.
Yeah, I mean, they're keeping the zero side pod. They are keeping that design, but they do have a B-spec, don't they, Sam? Which we could potentially see.
Yeah, I think when we look at the Mercedes car, we can't really take it in isolation, because if you think last year, a lot of teams were able to look to this year a lot earlier than Mercedes were. Mercedes had this pretty much a season-long problem of trying to fix this porpoising issue. Like, I remember when the cars came out of testing last year, we suddenly saw this Mercedes look wildly different to a lot of the cars. You mentioned the zero pods, that was sort of the main takeaway, whereas Ferrari and Red Bull had very different side pods. And I think this year we've seen a lot of other teams sort of move towards that Ferrari, Red Bull model, but Mercedes have, let's be honest, they've won 8 world championships in a row. They know what they're doing. So if they're confident that they're going to stick with that, they obviously know there's some kind of performance they can get out of it. And it's just whether they do that this season. I mean, there were rumours they were a B-spec ready to go, but whether we see that, I mean, we remember Aston Martin last year, the Spanish Grand Prix suddenly unveiled this whole new car. So whether Mercedes do something like that. But I think one of Mercedes' big strengths as well is they're able to develop quite consistently throughout the year. So I think you all said P3, but in my mind, I think they're going to finish P2 above Ferrari, just because I think. Sorry, we shouldn't say next to it. I think even if their car starts slightly behind Ferrari and Red Bull, I think they've got the consistency to sort of add up. I mean, we saw with Russell last year, even in that misperforming car, he got P5s constantly, and those points just do tick up. True. And if they can get the car to a place where they're challenging for race wins, I think Hamilton, along with Verstappen, is probably the best driver on the grid. So I think that's just going to benefit them, really.
Hamilton did say, though, rather ominously, that they had a mountain to climb. That was after jumping out of the car on the final day of testing. So in one breath, it sounds like they're happy, but then if you ask them the next day during that testing weekend, it was flip-flopping a little bit.
Yeah, I think they'll take it. This time last year, they had this whole unknown problem that's just suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I think at least they've got a base to build on. I think Hamilton's always been I know he's a very optimistic person in his personal life, but he's been quite pessimistic when he talks about the car, which is understandable. He's not going to say we've got an incredible car.
He's used to the best of the best.
He's just going to lump pressure on his team if he says that and they don't perform. So I think it's understandable. They'll sort of all be reeling it back in, really. It's
the power dynamics, isn't it? Russell's new. He's going to be a lot maybe kinder in the fact that he's come from a smaller team, whereas Hamilton, he's got the power to say, listen, this is not good enough. You guys need to step it up. I'm a world champion. I need a world champion type car. But I do trust the Mercedes engineers. I mean, you can't not. When they've developed the cars that they've developed and won the championships they've won, even though I'm worried about Mercedes early doors, if there's any engineers I trust to get this back on track, it's Mercedes. So I do expect them to be hopefully at least given us more competition this season. I need race wins. Suffered last season and starving for race wins.
Starving in football and in F1, aren't you?
Yes. Lost weight.
Right, let's take a look at the midfield once again. We did touch on it. You think that Aston Martin are going to kind of be up there as well, maybe Haas getting a little bit further up the pack. What do we think kind of about Alfa Romeo? They kind of go under the radar a little bit for me. Alpha Tauri, you said that you don't think they're going to be particularly strong, Sam.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I think they just weren't that great last year. I think they obviously finished P9. It's a funny time really for Alpha Tauri. Just actually, years before we came on air, they confirmed they're not for sale. There was a lot of talk about if they were going to go for sale. But it's been a few years. They were very much on an upward trend since they rebranded as Alpha Tauri. Like Gasly was getting not consistent podiums, but I think at least one a year, and that win as well in Monza. But last year was just a massive drop off in form, which is surprising considering their sister team Red Bull were doing so well. You would have thought there'd be sort of some similarities, but the A203 was just massively hard car to sort of get used to, and I think they just started. We mentioned it, Mercedes. I just think they're starting so far back, and I think they've perhaps got the weakest driver. One of the weakest driver pairing on the grid. I think obviously Nick De Vries is a rookie. He spent a lot of time at Mercedes, but
he's 28.
He's a very old rookie, as it were. But he's obviously got driving experience in other series with Formula E and Formula 2. But they've got him sort of having one race in his career, and they've got Yuki Tsunoda, who's been in it for 2 years now, but not massively improved or like really set the world on fire. So I think that combined with a misperforming car sort of spells trouble for me, really.
I think Tsunoda is tough to kind of analyze, because when he's focused and concentrated and on a good upward momentum, he can overtake. He is quite bold, but then he gets in his own head a bit, and it's like if something goes wrong, it's like everything just capitulates for him and he can't get back on side. So he's a difficult driver to manage. And then, like you said, with De Vries' debut season, every single other team, apart from, I say, Williams, kind of had like a leading, a Bottas or Alonso, been there, done it, will guarantee you points. This lineup doesn't have that. So understandable.
Who do you look to in the difficult moments there?
Alfa Romeo, as I said, one that just kind of goes under the radar.
The sexiest car on the grid. Oh my God, it's so good. I don't know if it's going to be particularly quick, but it's going to look good, whatever it does. And as we talk about a leader, they've got a leader in Bottas, who's many race wins, unbelievable joy at Mercedes he did. And I think he's just having a lovely time at Alfa Romeo. He seems just
enjoying himself.
He's just lovely. And Joe as well, I think is a fairly strong sort of second driver in terms of ability. It'll be really interesting to see how that car does over the first few seasons. Again, didn't see a huge amount of it in testing, but I think it's just going to look lovely.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see. But I kind of want to know, who's your favourite then for the rest of the pack?
My favourite for the rest of the pack?
Yeah.
In terms of like overachieving?
Who would you bank on from that midfield to finish?
I guess it's hard to say that you see Alonso overachieving, because Alonso, that's what he does.
Two-time world champion.
That's his remit. It's tough. I think I'm very, very interested to see Alpine, and obviously just because of not only the drama from last year, but because it is two French drivers, Ocon and Gasly.
Yeah.
I do think one of them is bound to have a great season. They're both great drivers. They're both very good, solid drivers. I rate both of them. So I'm struggling to pick between. If I had to lean, I'd probably lean towards Gasly. Yeah, I'm going to lean towards Gasly. I'll say Gasly's going to be this.
So you're going Alpine for your favourite?
Yeah, in terms of like really
best of the rest.
I know Aston Martin have had a good season, but I fell in love with the Alpine team.
I got it.
I'm going to stick with Alpine.
It's Otmar.
It is Otmar, yeah.
Sam, I assume you're backing Aston Martin?
No, Alpine for P4.
Oh, you're going to go Alpine?
Yeah, I think they're just cut above, really. I think Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly are both very good drivers, and they're just going to improve on last year, really. I think, I back Aston Martin to improve a lot, but I think they were one of the teams that started quite far behind, and I think Alpine are just, with McLaren sort of looking not as they were, I think Alpine are the clear favourites in P4.
Okay,
Joe? Boring, but same. I'll go Ocon, I think, over Gasly.
Okay.
I think he's got a little bit more pace, but I also think overachieving driver is going to be Fernando Alonso again. Can't really say overachieving, but I think he could get a couple of podiums this season. I really do.
Be interesting to see. As we're rating at the moment, as we're rating everyone, I want to know who your top 3 drivers are going to be for this season. Now, don't be biased. Don't just think about your own team.
What am I here for?
without your Mercedes hat.
No,
on.
I will be honest in the fact that I think Verstappen's 100% going to lead in terms of being at the top and win another drivers' championship. It's definitely difficult after that to look past Ferrari, simply because Leclerc, you know, and what they did last year, it was very solid. But I'm going to be biased. I'm going to go Hamilton in second.
Hamilton second?
Yeah, I'm going to go in the Drivers' Championship. I'm going to go Hamilton in second. Whether I really believe that or not, you don't need to know. Just know Hamilton in second is what I'm going to say.
It's not really saying that with your chest. Like.
And I'm going to go Leclerc in third.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I've got the same three drivers, not the same order. I'll go Verstappen, Leclerc, then Hamilton. Yeah, I think that's a good choice.
I go Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz.
Love it.
There you
Love
go.
that.
I think Sainz is up for a good season. It's been building. Something's going to happen.
Also,
this
I'm just
season.
noticing that none of you mentioned George Russell.
I just think Hamilton's cut above, really.
I think when push comes to shove, I think Hamilton struggled a lot last year with the car. He really didn't enjoy it, and understandably so. Obviously, George found that consistency, but I think once Mercedes have very few or no issues, I still think Hamilton is the better driver.
Yeah.
And I think that will show.
On top of that, I think he'll be prioritised. If he looks close to be in the top 2 or 3, he has the potential of getting 8 world championships. He will be heavily
100%.
prioritised.
Russell's got more time.
Russell's got
loads of time.
Russell could have 15 years of driving ahead. Hamilton maybe would have like 3 or 4.
3 or 4,
right?
yeah.
So I think if things go his way, they'll prioritise him massively.
Yeah.
Okay, I want your top 3 for constructors.
Red Bull.
For me, it kind of writes itself.
Yeah, you're loving this.
Yeah. It's nice to be at the top of the pack in something.
Red Bull, and it's really tough to split between Mercedes and Ferrari for constructors, because I do agree with you. I think your driver partnership is very good, but then so is Mercedes as well. I think it could be so close. Again, bias. I'm going to just slip Mercedes just ahead of Ferrari, but I think it's going to come down to like 10 points, something. It will be so close. I think it'll be I think Verstappen and Red Bull will kind of just push away, and I think Perez will do a solid enough job to wrap that up for constructors there. But I do think second and third is very, very close.
Yeah, very
close. So yeah, Mercedes. Then Ferrari.
Yeah, mine's the same order actually. Yeah, I think Mercedes is going to develop well. I think P2 for sure. We shouldn't say next year. I think Ferrari will be third, but yeah, I just think Mercedes is the stronger really.
I've got to back them. I think Ferrari are going to win it.
Wow.
I think they'll win the constructors. I just think they're going to get a lot of podiums. Some race wins, but I think they're going to see a lot of podium action, and potentially then taking that extra point with the fastest lap. And I think they'll do it. I think they'll come first. I think Red Bull will come second in the constructors, and Mercedes will be up and about, but not ever really, I don't think, competing for the constructors in a third.
Oh, it's interesting. Wow. Right, I just want to quickly look at the bottom 3 before we just talk about Bahrain. Who do we think is going to be the biggest flop of the season?
Driver-wise or team-wise?
Either. I'll leave it open to your interpretation.
I've said I think AlphaTauri P10, so I'll go with them still. In terms of drivers, I think I'd have to go with Logan Sargent. I think he's just an unknown and not a particularly quick car. So yeah, I think P20, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's difficult to disagree. To be completely honest, I think AlphaTauri will score a few more points than Williams. I think they'll come in at 9th with Williams 10th. But I agree, knowing so little about Logan Sargent, how can you back him? I mean, there's not so much about him really, and he obviously didn't win in F2. So yeah, I think that'll be difficult for them.
Are you mirroring?
I feel like it's tough. I'm trying to be outside the box here, but it's true. I don't know too much about.
You could say Tsunoda, just.
I think Tsunoda's got the bit between his teeth. I think Tsunoda will fight for those points, and he'll pick them up along the way. I'm not saying he won't make mistakes and he won't have those hothead swearing moments. I'm sure he will. But I do think he's going to kind of just clamor up enough points, and he's got the pressure of a new rookie coming in. I think that's going to light the fire inside him to kind of what he wants to lead this team. Whether he's capable of doing it is another question, but I do think he's going to pick up some points somewhere. Whereas Sargent, I'm just not too sure on him. All the other rookies have won in their respective divisions down below. He's coming in really late. So yeah, I'm going to
cut to him coming 8th at Bahrain.
We're done. If he does that, surprise, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, surprise. Right, let's have a look at Bahrain quickly. Sam, who do you think is going to do well on this track and why?
I think Red Bull, they've shown during testing, they know what they do on that track. It's always hard with a season opener. There's this sort of a resetting of the pack, really. But I think Red Bull have looked the strongest. There's no reason to doubt. They've had such a strong car last year. They've got probably the best driver on the grid, in my opinion. Yeah, so I think they're just by clear. I mean, that's quite a boring answer. So maybe someone like Aston Martin will do well as well. I don't think they'll get on the podium or anything like that. But I think Red Bull Red Bull both on the podium. I wouldn't be surprised to see them.
Do you know what it is with Formula One, with predictions, with races? After one corner, your whole prediction could be out the window. All it takes is one person to clip someone else's car and they go flying off into the gravel, and next thing you know, your whole prediction is finished. Predicting Formula One races, I always say, is literally, it's pointless.
But I have to ask.
Here's my prediction. Go for it. Max to win from pole. McLaren not to score any points. I think they're going to really struggle early on in the season, and I think Alonso will live up to the hype of this Aston Martin, and I think he could come in at 5th.
Okay.
Wow.
You didn't actually give me a prediction. You just
I know. I just trashed predictions.
Straight over
no prediction.
Straight over that.
After trashing predictions, I will give mine. I'm gonna go over Max win as well. I think one of the Mercedes drivers will be on that podium. Whether it's George or Lewis, I'm not sure. But I have a sneaky feeling that they might be able to scrape a third. And yeah, I think in terms of driver of the day, if we do predictions from that, I think Bottas. I'm gonna give Bottas something. I don't know why. I'm just gonna go for it. Yeah, something could happen. If it's the first race of the season, there's always something crazy can happen, and I just feel like Bottas. If there's something crazy that happens, he'll take advantage with his experience, and I'm banking on some sort of crash or red flag or something.
On this particular track, what is good and what's bad about it?
It's just a very quick track. There's the very tight corners. I can't remember the exact turn number, but it's just sort of a good opening. There's no like real specific characteristic of it. I'd say I'm sure the people in Bahrain would disagree with me, but it's just like a good track to get started. Really, sort of have a fair test. I think that's probably why. As well as the money that might be involved. Probably why they chose it for testing. It's just like sort of a bit of everything, really.
Right, before we wrap up, what's your favourite track and least favourite?
Oh, that's good. The least favourite one is sticky. Favourite one, I'm going to leave it with Spa, which is an obvious answer because I just love it. But I will give a massive shout out to Interlagos and also to Baku because I love that street circuit. I think it's brilliant. Such a tough one.
Yeah.
I think Spa's up there. I think Suzuka's up there. I think Silverstone's up there to use those of S's. In terms of least favourite, I love Monaco. I know it gets a lot of hate for not really overtaking and stuff, but I like the event and really. I'm struggling to think of just a boring track, really. There's plenty. Mexico's not great. It's got such a cool stand to go into, but it's not been one that's got a load of races that's come out that have been that exciting. So maybe I'll go with Mexico. I can't think of another one.
Yeah. I really like Canada. I think it's a massively underrated track. Spa as well, very good. And just to throw a big old spanner in the works, I hate Monaco.
Do you?
Really? No. It's just because
it's over by 3:00 on Saturday.
Yeah.
Unless a Ferrari is put in charge of the pole, then forget it. But generally, I think, as you say, the event of Monaco, amazing.
Yeah.
A big party. But in terms of actual racing, they've got to widen it. The cars can't overtake.
Yeah.
I think in the other last race there was one overtake or something, right? You think, and it was a Haas on a Haas.
Yeah.
Maybe that was 2 years ago. You think that's not what the sport's about.
I know, but it's such like an iconic place, Monaco. It's so historic.
We're not talking about place. We're talking about track.
True.
I was there a few weeks ago. It's a lovely place, but my least favourite is Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, it doesn't do it for me,
Really?
Abu Dhabi.
Yeah. Has to be.
I love Monza.
Has to be.
Yeah.
Don't know why. I just love it. I just love it. Okay, so that is everything for our first On Track GP preview. Thank you, Matisse. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Joe. Hope you guys have all enjoyed it. Make sure you leave your comments, get your predictions in as well if you can predict. As Matisse said, you can't, but if you can, make sure you like and subscribe as well. And we will be back with you over the weekend for all the F1 action that is going to be coming your way. Qualifying, race day Sunday. I'm very excited and hope you'll join us for it as well. So see you soon.